business or are you running a business? Valuation is the ultimate KPI.
Hey there, it's Mike Langford. Welcome to another episode of the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast, brought to you by Truelytics, the one and only comprehensive advisor transition management platform. This week on the show, I have Josh Patrick, the founder of Stage 2 Planning Partners, with me. Now, Stage 2 is a consulting firm that works with business owners on transition planning. Now, that sounds familiar, right? Here's the deal. One of the things I really love about Josh and his team and some of the ideas we're going to be talking about today on the show is there's a lot of emphasis on the relationship components and what the owner wants out of the transition. And there's also a lot of emphasis on the kind of the pre-planning, like the pre-process before you actually get into the process of like talking to a potential buyer and writing up the contracts and negotiating a price and so forth. This other stuff that has to happen to get a business ready to transition. And actually, Josh is an author. He's written 2 books, one of which I read in prep for this show. It's called The Sale Ready Company: What It Takes to Create a Business Someone Would Want to Own, Even If You Have No Intention of Selling. It's a fantastic read. Trust me, I banged it out in a weekend, just 2 days, and I'm a notoriously slow reader, as you'll hear me share with Josh. I loved it because it's presented in a kind of fictional story form, but he covers all the really important stuff that you as a business owner really need to be thinking about and working with your spouse, your team, right? The potential buyers of the company, lots of stuff you need to be doing, and maybe even working with your own financial advisor. Yes, a financial advisor for a financial advisor. Go check out the Brooklyn Brock episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast if you want to understand why that's important. Anyway, we cover a lot of ground here. Josh he's been through this process dozens and dozens of times with clients, so he knows what he's talking about, and there's a lot of great nuggets here for you if you were considering buying or selling a business, or frankly, just kind of stepping back and paring back the work that you do as you kind of want to spend more free time doing the other things you do as you're aging, all right? So you are going to love this episode. As always, if you haven't done so already, please do make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. We're everywhere, baby. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, the YouTubes, right? So you can check out me and Josh just hanging and banging, chatting it up, all right? Other than that, if you have questions or suggestions for topics or a guest for the show, please do make sure you send those in. podcast@truelytics.com, or you can hit us up on the socials. We're active on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. You can find us there. Leave us a comment on YouTube. That'll get to us as well, all right? All right, let's get to the conversation with Josh Patrick. Josh Patrick, author of Sale Ready Company, which I read this weekend. I'm so excited to talk about on the show. Welcome to the Modern Financial Advisor Podcast. Great to have you, sir.
Thanks so much, Mike. I'm happy to be here and I appreciate it.
Awesome. This is great. You know, it's really funny. I love when people put me together with somebody and they preface like, you really have to have this guy on the show. And here's why. So Ian Carnell, the chief revenue officer for Truelytics, put us together and he's like, I want you to have Josh Patrick on the show. Here's why. He put me through the ringer. He challenged me. He made me work for every idea and everything I said. And at the end, I felt stronger for it. So if that's not an endorsement, I don't know what is. So fantastic. So before we get into things, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about your business and your experience here and why you chose to write a Sale Ready Company?
Well, it was really easy. The why I wrote a first book called Sustainable, a fable about creating a personally and economically sustainable business. And our hero built a sustainable business or was on the road to doing so. So the question happens, okay, what happens after I build a sustainable business? I'm probably 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 years older. And I'm at the stage where I should be thinking about transition, or I might want to be thinking about transition, or I might want to think about transitioning my role in the business. All those sort of things can happen. And there was another chapter there, which is creating a Sale Ready company. And Sale Ready, by the way, this is a real misnomer. Every time I say the term Sale Ready, everyone automatically goes to, oh, I'm getting my business ready to sell. No, well, you are doing that. But the truth is, if you create a sale-ready company, there's a really good chance you're not going to want to sell because you'll be making too much money and having too much fun. So the definition of a sale-ready company is a company that somebody else would want to own.
Yeah, I love it, and that's a great way of putting it, right? Like, would somebody be willing to buy this business, right, or take over ownership in whatever way, shape, or form that happens, whether it's succession planning and so forth. And it's so important because to your point, right, many businesses just aren't sale ready, right? The person's running the business, they're kind of heads in the weeds, if you will, and they've never thought about, hey, what if I had to step away from this company? Would somebody be able to take it over? And I think the reason why you and Ian got along so famously when you started talking about this is, Truelytics, that's what they do, right? That's what the company is doing. It's all about helping advisory firms basically be sale ready, right? To understand valuation of the business, understand how the business is performing across a whole bunch of key performance indicators, and benchmarking that, right, against other companies. And so I can totally see why you and I are having this conversation today.
Well, Truelytics is actually, they're responsible for one half of the equation.
Mm.
They're responsible for the economic viability of a business, the economic saleability of the business. There's also the personal saleability of the business, meaning, okay, how is this going to affect me on a personal level, not just an economic level? Am I emotionally ready to leave my business? Do I have someplace to do that's going to be good for me? Am I emotionally ready to lose all the people I came in contact with and all my friendships from the industry that I'm in? Because the truth is, when you sell your business, all those relationships fall off the end. That's part of being a trained transitionist. If you work in a company and you retire, you lose all those contacts as your friends almost overnight. Not because you're a bad person or they hate you or anything like that. It's just you're off the radar screen.
Yeah.
And once you're off the radar screen, it's really, really difficult for people to stay in touch. Hey, we're all busy.
Yeah.
Even when we're retired, we're busy. And yeah, we know we should call people, but we don't have time. Life gets in the way. And it can be very lonely. I mean, one of the big things that we work with folks on, and we talk about in the book, is how do you get to the point where you think or that you're able to leave the business, not drive your spouse completely out of their mind, and have a fulfilling life?
I got to tell you, I love that was in the book, and that really hit me too, was, a lot of us, I think myself included probably, when you vision retirement, which is, a couple of decades away from me, but I think about it, right? I think about like what that might be like. What will I do? But the point you made is like, your spouse, assuming you're married, has his or her own life going on too. They're busy. The things you may envision that you're going to do, like golf all the time, right? Might not be as cool as you think they are to do them every single day. And by the way, they'll only take a couple of hours. Even if you golfed every single day, there's still going to be a lot of other time to fill there. So I love the fact that you talk a lot actually in the book about, and for those listening, the book is a fictional story, right? It's a fictional story about a business owner and a consultant primarily as the two lead characters. And while it's a manufacturing company, the parallels are spot on for any RIA firm, right? Because by the way, all RIA firms and independent financial advisory firms are really small businesses. Rarely do you see them much larger than 20 employees, right? The average RIA has fewer than 5 advisors on the team. So it's
usually it probably has fewer than 10 employees.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, the lessons you're teaching in there are incredibly spot on for this audience. But I love the fact that you talked a lot about the family dynamic, right? Of, listen, let's talk about you first. We can talk about the business, but like, what are you going to do? Because you spend all this time in the business.
Well, that's step number 2 to create a sale-ready company.
Yeah.
I mean, what's next?
Yeah. Right.
And if you don't answer that question well,
Yeah.
you really shouldn't be thinking about leaving your business. Folks who have not spent time thinking about that often have a major, 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 major case of what I call seller's remorse. And so is the rest of the world, too. I'm not the only one that calls it that. But seller's remorse essentially is, gee, I sold my business, and I'm really sorry I did it because now I'm not happy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it happens, I mean, everyone is going to have a certain amount of seller's remorse. It might be you're being bothered by ex-employees who didn't bother you. I had a client that's happened with. Otherwise, he was thrilled to be out of his business. It might be I don't know how to spend my time. It might be I'm pining because nobody pays attention to me anymore. That's my uncle, who's 91 and still wants to go back into the restaurant business. So there's all sorts of things that happen with people who are leaving their business. And the effect of leaving their business is at the very least having a little bit of tough times making the adjustment to what's next. You know, one of the things I've gone through is training to be a certified financial transitionist. And Susan Bradley has come up with 4 stages of transition along the way. There's anticipation. I'm going to anticipate an ending is coming. The ending arrives. Now it's time for me to start going through passage where I go from where I was to where I'm going to be. And then finally we hit the new normal. Now, passage is the area that is the most difficult. It's messy. At the very best, you're going to feel a little bit out of sorts. At the worst, you're going to feel like your world's turned completely upside down. I mean, if you suddenly lose a spouse, you go flying into passage, and it typically is 7 or 8 years before folks who lose a spouse unexpectedly come out the other side. People who sell businesses, they generally go through it faster. It's rare someone takes 7 or 8 years to do that. And we actually have a way of, and we talk about it in the book, about what we wanted John Aardvark to do along the way so he could practice being no longer actively employed at the company, and more importantly, his spouse could practice having him around the house.
That's right. Yeah, and I that's such an important thing. You think about it. I mean, my wife and I, I'll give as an example, we're mid-career right now, right? So we still got plenty of time in front of us, but we're experienced, both of us in our careers, and we spend time together. Both of us work from home, separate ends of the house, so we see each other all the time. But there is work right in there, and we have our separate work lives going on. If all of a sudden it was like nothing but all day long, just the two of us hanging out and doing stuff, well, I look forward to that, as any nice and good husband would. There may be some challenges with that, right? Like one of the things that I know that I feel, and I imagine the advisors and owners of RIA firms and other wealth management leaders that are listening can nod their head along with this is, there's a desire for significance, right? There is, I want to feel like I'm accomplishing something. I want to get up every day and have this thing that I'm working towards, even if it's a small goal, like, hey, I've got to get this thing over to this client or whatever. I want to do this thing. And if that's taken away, or you let it go away because you decided to exit, you got to replace it with something.
Yeah. I mean, that's just, that's a very big piece. I talk about 2 sides of business, economic and personal sustainability. And that's the personal side of a transition. The economic side is relatively easy to figure out whether it works or not. That's just math.
Yeah.
The personal side is a whole lot more complicated. And there's where people really get kind of, caught up. If you talk to people in the M&A world, they're going to tell you that an awful lot of their deals fall apart when the owner starts taking a good look at what comes after the business sale.
Yeah.
They don't see a compelling future, so they pull the business off the market, which drives the M&A people crazy. They might do themselves some good if they focus on that before they accepted the engagement, but that's a different conversation altogether.
It is interesting too. Like, anybody who's been in this space realizes, and advisors, by the way, if you're an advisor, you can feel this, right? As you're working with your clients towards their eventual retirement, you are having to be somewhat of a part-time psychologist, right? Helping your client work through some of the emotional components that go along with that. So this shouldn't be a surprise that you might have to deal with some of this stuff as well. You mentioned the financial stuff, and let's jump to that real quick because as you're reading through the book, and I'm not going to give away all your secret sauce here. If people want that, they can buy the book. It's available on Amazon, where I got it from. And we'll make sure we get that linked up in the show notes. You mentioned that having a valuation performed is step one in the process of creating a sale-ready company, right? Of making sure the company is sale-ready. Why is that so important?
Well, it's not so much evaluation as you want to know what the business is potentially worth.
Yeah.
And evaluation is certainly one way of getting there. And you want to make sure it's a realistic valuation. And one of the things I really like about Trulytics is that the wealth management firm has been poisoned by people who overvalue firms or selling firms. Mm-hmm. And I could go into a long conversation why I think that's unethical and all that stuff. I won't do it. But the truth is they're overvalued. And when you're doing an internal transition, or even if you're doing an external transition, if your business is overvalued and everything doesn't go perfectly and nothing ever goes perfectly in the business sale for the acquirer, they're not going to blame themselves for making a mistake. They're going to blame you. And when there's a really, really high valuation in a wealth management firm, typically there's a very high percentage of owner financing that's also involved in that. That's a huge risk because if something happens that's wrong or something that happens that shouldn't have happened and the buyer thinks it's your fault because you didn't disclose to them or it was your fault or it certainly wasn't their fault because I've never seen buyers take responsibility when things don't work out so well. Yeah. So if you misrepresented, what are they going to do? They owe you money. You don't owe them money. They're going to just stop paying you. So now you not only don't have the cash flow from your business, now you've got to fight the buyer to pay you for it. And that often will involve attorneys. And as we know, attorneys are not cheap.
Yeah.
Especially if you go into court.
Yeah. And one huge distinction, again, we led off the conversation talking about how, RIAs and independent financial advisory firms are small businesses. And it's very similar to the manufacturing business you use as an example in the book. However, there is one big distinction. There's no capital equipment, right? There's no patents on things, right? You can't just walk in and say, I'm repossessing my factory here. If you're an advisor, chances are, if you have turned things over fully to an acquiring advisor or teams of advisors, you're not just going to be able to come right back into your clients and say, hey, sorry, I told you Josh was taking over the business. Hey, Josh didn't pay me, so I'm your advisor again, right? You don't get to do that as easily. It's a relationship-based business, right? You don't just get to take the capital back.
Well, you don't. And if you did, you're going to find that by the time you got the right to take it back, they would have completely destroyed the business. There's nothing to take back.
Yeah. Now, luckily, I haven't heard too many nightmare scenarios. I'm sure advisors, though, and teams.
I can give you a whole laundry list of them.
I don't want them right now.
New York Times.
Well, I haven't heard too many, which is, I'm sure they exist. Well, one thing that has been concerning me as of late, and I'm working to have, I talked to Kieran Bowl from Price Metrics McKinsey recently on a different show. And we talked about the state of the North American retail wealth management market. And one of the things that they pointed out in this McKinsey report is most of the growth that has been happening in the wealth management industry for financial advisors over the last several years, at least going back 5 or 6 years, has all come from market appreciation, right? It's all market performance. 75% of the growth you see in the industry has been from the markets. Almost none, right, is coming from adding new clients and adding new assets, right, for the most part. So we're relying on the markets, right? So as what a friend of mine calls it, he's like, it's free money, right? The market goes up every single year. You just make more money as a business owner just because the markets just went up. You didn't have to do anything. And
this is the only industry in the country that I'm aware of that's true.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, cry us a river. Most other industries are saying like, geez, you make more money. You don't add any new clients or you don't add any new business really. There's a couple of problems that come up, and I'd love to get your take on, how one should think about this when they're entering into an M&A or a succession planning scenario. One is if I'm buying a business, we talk a lot about, discounted cash flows as a valuation methodology, and we look at the growth rate. So I'm buying a stream of cash flows and I hope that that's going to grow, right? If I'm the acquirer. However, if a lot of the growth is coming from the markets, I have to figure out what part of the growth is available. Now, I would imagine as if I'm buying a business, usually, the seller has kind of let the business kind of atrophy or flatten out a little bit and they're exiting. So maybe I can see more growth there. But that's definitely a risk, right? It's a risk to the buyer, and it's a risk to the seller as well, right? Like what if the markets go south?
The markets will go south, and then they'll go north again. That's what markets do.
Right. Yeah.
But here's the thing about the wealth management world. A lot of people are doing acquisitions in lieu of adding new clients.
Mm-hmm.
So they may decide, let's say they have a business that has $1 million in free cash flow, just for fun. And they're going to go to you and they're going to buy your business and they'll pay you 2.7 times sales. And if you do a Trulicks analysis, you'll find out that that's about twice what the business is actually worth. But there are M&A firms in the industry who value businesses regularly around 2.7 times sales. By the way, that's the dumbest way to value a business of all times. Mm-hmm. Anybody who values a business based on sales, we call an idiot. But let's say they do that, and the real value of the business, which is what Trulytics normally comes in, is somewhere around 1.5, 1.7, 1.8. That's about where it comes in as being the financial value of the business. So you're basically paying, if the business does $2 million in sales, you're paying almost $2 million extra for the business. Well, if their business has $1 million in free cash flow, they may say, okay, I'm going to take $500,000 of that cash flow and put it towards buying this business. Now, that's called a non-accretive sale, meaning that eventually they'll get more cash flow from it, but for the first 5 or 7 years they're paying for the business, it's actually costing them $500,000 a year. So they took an extra $2.5 million out of their pocket, and that's on an after-tax basis to pay for the business, which was overvalued. And this is where the problem comes in, is that when people pay at that valuation level, they often feel like they've been ripped off and they stop paying. 1, 2, 3 years down the road, they'll say, you've gotten enough money from me, I'm not going to pay you anymore because this business is costing me money to own. Mm. And I've seen business, buyers, I can give you stories of buyers where the buyers went bankrupt because the sellers didn't get a personal guarantee. I can tell you a story about a seller who sold the business and she remained an officer in the corporation. The state regulators came in and the buyer had disappeared and gone bankrupt, and they fined her and made her pay all the fines, even though she never got paid for the business.
That's rough.
So I am very wary of anybody selling a business where they're taking 50, 60% of the business and they're allowing the buyer to make them into a bank for 50 or 60% of the business.
Yeah.
And the seller doesn't act like a bank.
Yeah. It's interesting. And so that's a big point you make in the book too, by the way. You go through some of the steps that a seller should take to protect themselves if they have to act like the bank, right? And that happens for many sales. They're seller finance, and if you're going to seller finance, absolutely read the book to make sure that you put some elements in there to protect yourself. One of the things we've seen recently is the rise of outside financing, right? There are several providers now in the space offering commercial loans, right? Traditional commercial loans to buy an RIA. And, that removes a lot of the risk on the seller's behalf, right? That's, the note is there. They're able to finance, the buyer is able to finance 100% of the business, pay it out over 10 years. And it's oftentimes that works only when it's not the individuals who were in the business, right? A junior advisor. It works when a third party comes in to merge a firm. But we're seeing that which is, if I was the seller, I'd be thinking about that, right? Wanting to have.
Well, that's what I would want if I was a seller.
Yeah.
Will the lenders continue doing this? I mean, you're going to start seeing some defaults. And, people in the industry, the lenders, they see, the market going up and increasing sales for nothing happening. They see the same thing everybody else does. But at some point, that might just, go the other direction. Yeah. And then what happens? Banks get very, very, very nasty very fast. I can tell you that from personal experience. When, their borrowers start having financial problems with paying off notes.
Yeah. Give us our money is a break your legs type of thing.
Well, they do things like call loans or move you into workout or other very, very unpleasant and not so much fun stuff. And I can promise you that these banks don't do what dumb sellers do, is they will get your personal guarantee. They will get your spouse's personal guarantee. They will put UCC1s, which is the way people, put security on loans on anything that you have that moves or could be of any value to them. So if you happen to have a business that doesn't perform and you overpay for it, you're going to be dealing with a bank that really doesn't care if you lose everything.
Yeah.
In fact, they might even like it if you lose everything, because banks sort of get very snippy when loans fall delinquent or aren't paid.
Yeah. It's interesting, a couple of things that help protect against this thing happening, right? So you lay out a whole bunch of things in the book, but a couple of things that I found really important was, number one, from the early phases of this process, being very transparent and open with your team, right? So if you've got a team, let's just say it's that RIA firm that's got, 10 people under the roof. There's a single owner, but there's several advisors and staff members. Make sure that they know there's a succession plan, that it is coming. It's something you're working on. And especially if there's family members, right? Because as what you outlined in the book, it's a family-owned business. Families can get squirrely, as nice as they are, as much as we love dad or mom, right? If you're like expecting that someday I'm getting this business, it can get tense, right? So how early should the owner start talking to his or her team about succession plans?
I'll give you two answers to that.
Oh, okay.
One, it depends how old the owner is.
Okay.
If the owner is 60 years old and they're not talking about what their succession plan is, all the people working for them are concerned about what their succession plan is. For example, I'm 69 years old, and last year I told the other two people in my firm that I'm actually going to give them the firm because I don't think there's a whole lot of value in it. We're a small firm, and they're going to take it over when I'm 72. So that's what the plan is. At 72, now I'll likely stay on and continue doing what I'm doing as far as my own particular clients go past 72. But at 72, they're going to take on the economic responsibility for the firm. And if they don't want to, then I'll close the firm down. I'll find some place to move my book of business, and they can do what they want. But it's a good deal for them, and it would be an okay deal for me. Yeah. So I will move from being the owner of the firm to being an associate of the firm, and they'll move to being the owners, and they'll have the economic responsibility, which I've had for the last, 23 years or so.
I love that approach. And you talked about that in prep. And I really wish I put that in our show notes that I sent over to you, like the prep doc that I sent to you. I was looking through some other notes I took. I'm like, oh, I forgot Josh mentioned this thing. So you actually just teed me up on this. And it does kind of fit into the model you're talking a little about there. At least it's adjacent to the model. You talked about a wind down strategy, and you used how to 80-20 the business. And it seems like it's very similar to what you're talking there, right? So, and we brought this up a couple of times in the show about there's a common misconception, I think, with many folks who are considering succession or considering selling a business or buying a business, that it's an all or nothing thing, that it's all the business, right? And what you're talking about in the 80-20 is that it doesn't have to be all, right? It can be a portion of the business. Would you mind walking through that? Because I thought it was, for me, I remember it being very like, oh, that's what an amazing strategy.
Well, it's really based on what's called the 80-20 principle, the Pareto principle, whereas 80% of your results comes from 20% of your actions. So what that means is that 80% of your profits come from 20% of your customers. And actually, in a lot of wealth management firms, it's 10% of their customers. So let's say you have 100 customers you're serving, and you get to the point where you're 65, 68, 70 years old, and you say, I really like being in the industry. I just don't want to work 5 days a week. So you say, okay, I'm going to find a home for 80% of my customers. Now, that might be I give them away. Some people want to sell it. If I was in an advisor's shoes and advising, I say give it away because it's not worth a whole lot to you. And in fact, you're going to end up making more money by jettisoning 80% of your clients and just keeping 20% of them, because you're also going to jettison about 95% of your overhead. So by getting rid of 95% of your overhead, you're going to make more money, work less time, and any new business that you do bring in will be the same type of clients that you have with that 20% already. So, you're going to always bring some new business in, likely, or, 1 or 2 new clients a year. That's not a lot. I mean, if you really want to, grow a business, you need to be bringing in probably 1 to 1.5 clients a month. And you need to have a system for doing that. But if you decide you want to do the wind down, it's a pretty darn good way to do a business. Is, you're sitting there working 5 days a week. Well, now you work 1 day a week or 1 week a month or 1 week every 6 weeks. And you still have your hand in the industry. You still have a toe in there. You still have the relationships. You don't lose them because you're still part of the business. And you'll have enough volume where the people who were wholesaling to you will still come and visit you because you still are a significant portion of business that they depend upon. So where I fit, especially in the wealth management world, there's really no reason for any advisor to walk away before they're 75 or 80.
Yeah.
And I'm not even sure how long you can go with. I think it depends on your clients, but typically if you're, 65 years old, your clients are probably between 55 and 70 or 75. And as you start aging out, they start dying off. I hate to be so blunt about it, but that's what happens.
Yeah.
And, that's a way that, can get out of the business, and it's more economically advantageous for the seller or the owner. Let me give you an example. Let's say our business is doing $1 million in sales, and I could sell it for $2 million. Well, after taxes and fees, I'll be left with about $1.2 million. And if I invest that money in, I'm going to get about $60,000 I can spend a year. And that's on the high side. What if I decide to 80-20 my business, so I keep 80% of that business, and now I've got $800,000 in sales, and my overhead is 30%, so that's $240,000 in overhead. So I've got somewhere around, say, $600,000-$700,000 in cash flow a year. Well, $600,000 or $700,000 in cash flow will get to a lot faster past that $1.2 million I'm getting to keep, like in 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So if I keep it for 5 years, now I'm about $1 million ahead of the game.
Yeah.
If I keep it for 10 years, I'm close to $3 or $4 million ahead of the game.
Yeah.
So, a business, when it's sold, is always worth less as far as cash flow goes to the owner than an operating business. When you sell a business, it shouldn't be because this is how I maximize my retirement. Right. It's not.
Yeah. And I think you're right on that. I think, one of the number one reasons I've heard is like why advisors don't sell their business is exactly what you described, right? If I work for a couple more years, I'm basically going to net what I would have sold the business for by working for a couple of years. And this isn't that hard of a job, right? And most advisors are not cranking away at 60 hours a week every week because, again, they're not growing. Most of them get to a point where they're very comfortable and it becomes a lifestyle business. There's no reason why you should get rid of the lifestyle. An interesting form of transition, as you just described it, would be if you have junior advisors, hey, listen, I'm going to sell you a big chunk of my book, transition it to you. You get to take it over. You get growth as an advisor. My business has increased stability because I get to keep you here. And team retention is really important with succession, right? You can still kind of transition the ownership, if you will, of the business, kind of the leadership as you become more of a, as you said, it's like an associate advisor, right? You're selling off a portion of the business. And I just find that really, really smart.
I'm actually doing that with a firm right now.
Yeah.
I've got a firm we're doing that with. It happens to be the son who is the buyer of the smaller part of the business. But it's still an 80-20 strategy where the father is going to keep his, 30 favorite clients. And over time, next 3 or 4 years, he's going to sell the rest to his son.
Yeah. And what's interesting about that too is, one of the problems with internal succession is exactly what you described earlier, right? That they'll have to take a seller note because outside capital is not available to them because usually junior advisors have not amassed a large enough amount of capital that they would be able to buy the business with cash, right? Or put a large amount down. So they're going to have to try to finance all of it. But they could buy portions, right? Kind of, if you think about any type of like stock ownership program, right? You're acquiring small amounts over time. This is the ability to buy a handful of clients over time. And the senior advisor gets to wind down, as you describe it. And at some point in time, he or she could walk away. Or if they pass away, the team is there to buy the rest of the business and let if there's a surviving spouse or whatever, walk away nicely.
Yeah, it's always a good way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. I know we've rounded second base. Let's put it that way. We still have some more time together. I want to dig into some other really interesting things that you brought up. One that was fascinating to me was the increasing the value of the business prior to succession. And I just think that's it's an idea that people don't think of too often, right? And I hinted at it earlier that what we see is as advisors age, they just get more comfortable, right? They're not bringing on new clients. They're not actively soliciting new business necessarily. They're playing a crap ton of golf. Like you said, they might be making $600,000 a year. Life is awesome. So the business really hasn't grown all that much when they're entering this succession planning. Or the pre-M&A portion. But you recommend, hey, listen, in the book, you talk, hey, listen, you guys really should start thinking about increasing the value of the business so it's much better for you to buy. Can you walk through like the rationale of like why increasing the value and involving the team to increase the value is so important?
Yeah, there's I call the 4 buckets of profit. Mm-hmm. And it's rare that a business fills all 4 buckets of profit. And the 4 buckets are lifestyle for the owner of the business, an emergency fund with at least 6 months of operating cash put aside, having a fully funded retirement plan because the value of the business will not get many owners to retirement. I mean, there are some. I have a client that has a business worth $50 million, so I'm not especially worried about his financial planning. And then the final thing is a fully funded growth program. And a growth program is not just marketing and advertising dollars. It's what does it cost to bring in new advisors as you're growing the amount of clients you have, because you're going to bring an advisor on before you've got enough business to keep that advisor totally busy. In the wealth management world, in the non-wealth management world is, how do you afford the extra inventory and the extra receivables and the extra equipment that you need? I have a contractor, subcontractor I'm working with that does windows. We just put a 3rd crew on. And that cost them $40,000 in just truck and trailer and fit up. without getting the crew ready up and trained. So, those are all costs of growth, which many people don't think about. The good news about the wealth management world is growth is almost free. I mean, you don't have receivables because you get paid in cash every quarter. You don't have inventory for all intents and purposes. You do have some people that work for you, but frankly, your labor cost is a really low number as a percent compared to other businesses. And the profits are really pretty obscene. They're not obscene, they're huge.
Yeah.
There are very few businesses that you could even think about having a bottom line that has 40%. And a well-run wealth management business is 30% north. A mediocre wealth management business is 20. When I was in my vending business, which had huge inventory, huge complexity, and huge capital costs, a great year with us was 4%.
Yeah.
So when I compare the wealth management business to other industries, there are only 4 or 5 other industries I can think of that even come close to how good a business the wealth management world is. And the unfortunate thing about that is you can have a really well-run a really good professional service firm that is a horribly run business. Because there's no economic need to make it great.
Yeah. 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 So I'm glad you bring that up. And I know many of our advisors might be offended when I mention this, but I've talked to, many folks in the practice management space across the industry, and many of them will lament at how advisors, in their view, are just terrible business people. And part of it is because the business is so profitable. It's exactly what you say, right? They haven't had to get dialed in as business owners. I think the other part is most of them don't come into the business thinking that they're going to be business people, right? I'm going to be.
Well, that's true with all business owners.
Yeah.
I mean, Michael Gerber with the E-Myth has a great saying. It says, most business owners are technicians who are having an entrepreneurial cramp.
I like that. Yeah. Because I always say, it sounds like I'm beating a dead horse on this podcast, but I always say, most advisors got their start as stockbrokers, right? So they were salesmen and women, and they never, at the beginning, didn't think of themselves as I'm a business owner, to your point. So they get a cramp as a salesperson, and they realize I've got a business here and I have to think about marketing and operations and all that type of stuff.
Well, the other side of it is these are small businesses.
Yeah.
You don't have to actually run a business like a business till you get to 15, 20 employees.
Yeah.
And a wealth management firm with 20 employees has got north of $1 billion in assets under management.
Yep.
So again, they don't have to be especially great business people because the cash flow is so good.
Yeah.
But at some point, if you want to grow to 25, 30, 40 people, and there are a few firms that get that big, now you have to start running your business like a business because you no longer have yourself and a bunch of helpers. Yeah. You have to have people who are independently doing jobs and doing functions within your business. And it's a business, it's not a practice. I hate it when people call a wealth management firm a practice. Yeah, okay, you practice what you do, but you own a business. You do not own a practice. And I've gotten into some really big fights with people at, the FPA retreat about this. Yeah. And they say, no, we're professionals. We don't have businesses. I said, well, yeah, you do, but I'm not going to argue with you about that because it's too frustrating.
Well, it's one could say it's semantics, but I don't think it is. We've talked about that on this podcast. Actually, sent the people who listen to the intro of the podcast. It says, do you have a practice or do you have a business? And there is a difference. It's a business, as you've laid out in the book, and we've talked about. It can run without you. Frankly, that is the very.
Well, this
definition.
is the thing. Now there's 4 pieces of creating sustainability in the business. And when you say increase the value, these are the 4 things we focus on. Are you values-led?
Yeah.
Have you articulated your values? Do you have clarifying statements around so all your stakeholders know what you're about? Do you have a recurring revenue stream? Well, if you're an RIA, you have the best recurring revenue stream that's ever been invented.
Yeah.
Are you operationally irrelevant? Have you reached operational freedom from your business? And the answer for wealth management owners, no, a resounding no, because almost no wealth management firms make their customers customers of the firm. They look at them as individual clients. When you own a wealth management firm, you must, if you want to make it transferable, make them customers of the firm, because that's how you have sticky clients when you leave. You don't want to be dependent. And then the fourth, which again is where many wealth management firms fall flat on their face, is have you systematized your firm? Is your firm running effectively and efficiently, and do you have systems in place that are consistently followed in everything that you do? And the amount of firms that do that, you as a percent, is less than 10, I would submit.
That is, I don't even know if we can follow that up. That was really fantastic. I love the way that you just nailed that. It was great.
Well, that's what, that's the first book I wrote was, here's it's a sustainable business that leads to the 4 buckets of profit. And once you have a sustainable business, then you can start thinking about sale ready.
And by the way, I have the other book with me. I have not been didn't have time to read it. I got this on Friday. We're recording on a Monday. I am going to dive into it because number one, I liked your style of writing. And by the way, as a child who grew up in the 80s, Pink Panther, Aardvark, right on the top front. Like basically, so how can you lose?
You know why I chose the Aardvark family?
No, why? That's actually, I do want to know why, because it's like, the business is Aardvark and Sale Ready Company, and now I see an Aardvark Anteater on the front. I'm like, okay, now I got to know. You have an affinity for it, obviously.
Okay, so where do Aardvarks have their head?
In the ground all the time, right? Yeah,
right.
I guess.
Yeah, so okay. I want you to get your head out of the sand, look up around you, and be more thoughtful and mindful in what you're doing. And I want you to be the anti-Aardvark.
Yeah. I got to tell you something. When I read Sustainable, I'm going to hear Jackie Gleason's voice, who did the voice of the Aardvark and the Anteater and the Pink Panther. Just so you know, that's the way I'm going to read it. Thinking of that.
Okay. Well, I wasn't aware of that, so that's kind of interesting.
You'll love it. I'll have to send you a link. So you is this news to you that the Jackie Gleason, who's an old comedian, from the 60s on up and everything.
I know who Jackie Gleason is. Yeah.
So he was the voice of the Anteater and the Pink Panther cartoon series. He'd have all these different cartoons. It was Anteater and the ant always got away from the Aardvark, And but anyway, wonderful part of my childhood. So I'll maybe grab a couple of screenshots and slide that in here to our podcast so people can see it. Well, Josh, this is a fantastic. I get so much out of this, and I actually think we're going to grab chunks of this and be sharing this for years and years to come, because just some of the content you shared it's evergreen, right? This doesn't go out of style.
Yeah, I've been talking about this stuff for 25 years now.
Yeah. I'm sure a lot of folks are going to want to follow up with you and your team. What's the best way for somebody to reach out to you and say, hey, listen, Josh, some of the things you talked about on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast, I want some help with that. I want to make sure that we're making the right decisions here. I'm sure they're going to want to talk to you.
Best way to do it is you can find me on LinkedIn, which is easy. Yeah. It's Ask Josh Patrick on LinkedIn. You can go to my website. I have 2 of them. One is www.stage2planning.com. That's the number 2. Mm-hmm. The other is www.sustainablebusiness.co, and that is not .com. That's a .co. Okay. Or you can just send me an email, jpatrick@stage2planning.com. I'm kind of email obsessed.
Okay.
I generally answer within an hour or so, but no more than 24 hours. And if you don't get an answer in 24 hours, that means I either lost the email, trashed it by accident, or it ended up in my spam folder somehow.
Okay, wonderful. Well, Josh, this has been a fantastic conversation. It's been a delight chatting with you. Thank you so very much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom. I get a lot out of it.
Well, thanks, Mike. This was fun. I really enjoyed doing this.
Perfect. Thank you very much for listening to and/or watching this episode of the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. It's always fantastic to have you with us. Huge props to Josh Patrick for dropping the wisdom bomb on us today. What a fun conversation. I really enjoyed chatting with him. Anytime I get to talk to somebody who brings a kind of a new thought process, a new perspective based on their experience, kind of in the same area that I've been focusing on for a while, it's really exciting. He brought up some ideas that I had never thought of. And look, I've recorded a lot of episodes talking about advisor transition by this time. And we hit on some stuff that I had never thought of. And trust me, get the book, by the way. Real easy read, fun read too, by the way. I really enjoyed reading the book. And I'm not just saying that because Josh was on the show. Usually, I'm just gonna be blunt. A lot of the business books that folks write and that aren't necessarily, bestseller books, you're kind of just like, all right, whatever. You wrote this book so you can hand it to a client and you can hold yourself up as an author. This isn't like this. There's a lot of really good stuff in here. It's not a super long book. Like I said, I banged it out in 2 days and I wasn't just sitting there reading nonstop. I was kind of in between while I was watching a football game on TV or whatever, or in the car on the way to my kid's basketball game. Super easy read, fun stuff. And by the way, the book I haven't read, turns out this is kind of a precursor to the book. Josh has also wrote a book called Sustainable, a fable about creating a personally and economically sustainable business. Now, most financial advisory firms, as Josh was talking about, are sustainable businesses just by nature of the business model. But the same characters that are in Sale Ready Company, I guess, are in here. So I'm looking forward to tackling that. And he's got a couple of the books in the works. So I know I'm probably going to read them all. Okay. All right. As always, if you have a question or a suggestion for me or for a topic or a guest of the show, please do send those in, podcast@truelytics.com, or swing by truelytics.com and kind of use that contact form there. And then if you're not a Truelytics user, based on after this conversation, come on, what the heck are you waiting for? Get on it, dude. Go there, sign up, try it out. You're going to get a lot of value. Get yourself prepared to be a sale-ready company, even if you have no plans on selling the business. See what we did there? All right. We'll talk to you next time on the Modern Financial Advisor podcast. Please stay safe and be nice to each other. See ya. Bye.